Hey everybody, this is Jon Croft with Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft. How's everybody doing? That intro was from White Bat Media. You can get their music as well, and they're great stuff. We appreciate those guys from Vancouver. But tonight we're talking about what is Media Moses, the foundation of Media Moses, or the founding of Media Moses, what it is, and how I got involved with making this media company. So that's pretty cool. We're going to have Rebecca coming in just a minute. And not sure when we're going to have new guests, but we're working on it. And what I'm trying to do before I get new guests, just so you know, is to get through a lot of the major subjects and themes that I wanted to talk about before I get new guests in. And so I know all of you guys are waiting, chomping at the bit to join us here. And we can't quite let you in yet. So that's kind of funny because we're mostly unknown. So this is fine. We love you guys. It takes time to become something. I mean, we've only been doing this for like a few months, and on YouTube even shorter. So probably just a month on YouTube, but doing quite well so far, and hoping to get some of you guys coming as guests soon, but we're not quite there yet. But I've been talking about setting the ground rules so far. I'm on episode 15 now. I've been talking about setting ground rules as it comes to what is culture, what is the culture war, what does all this mean, how do you delineate between culture and politics, how do you delineate between real art and culture and propaganda, what should we be involved in doing when in the midst of something like some kind of cultural collapse or divisions we find in culture, and these common problems we're seeing now with the collapse of our Western civilization. We're seeing culture collapsing as well because it's being filled with propaganda. And as we've discussed before, that is not real culture. So that's manufactured and synthetic. So it's not real culture. And we hope that people will start to understand what real culture really is about, which is authentic discussions about life and myth and stories and questions like, does God exist? Questions like you'll find in science. And so, you know, these need to be authentic dialogues that we have. And so we appreciate authentic stuff. And we see it as authentic culture building, an attempt to authentically build culture. So, yeah, we have a lot more to say, though, than just the ground rules. We're going to talk about what we're doing here, why we're here talking about this stuff, what we intend to do. We intend to participate in this dialogue about culture much, much, much more. Not just setting ground rules like we've been doing. And so when people don't understand what we're doing, this is why I'm setting ground rules. When people don't understand what we're doing and why we're doing it this way, we can refer them to these episodes and these discussions. Many of the ground rules you'll find here will end up in my book, The Moses We Need, which is coming. So Moses, meeting Moses, what is all this Moses talk, right? Well, if you're a Christian, you know the story of Moses, you read the Bible, right? If you don't read the Bible, get to it. We've talked about this, guys. You got to get to doing this work, because if you don't, you're making a weak culture, a weak society. You have to build a fortress of truth. So, looks like we have Rebecca here. There we go. How you doing, Rebecca?
I'm doing great.
Hey!
Hey, I didn't mean to interrupt. You were on a roll there.
You're great.
Your listeners to read the Bible, so that was good.
I love being interrupted by you.
Thank you.
It's the best kind of interruption, besides the Holy Spirit, of course. He's better than you. Yes. So we like those interruptions.
Oh, yes.
We say thank you. So, yes, we are talking about, I was just about to talk about what's with the Moses stuff, right?
Yeah.
What's with all the Moses stuff? Well, Moses was a patriarch. But, no, Moses was doing more than just being a patriarch, right? Being based. He was also leading his people out of slavery, right? So if you know the story, the Israelites were in, what we now know as Israel. And then they sold Joseph into slavery. And his father didn't know this. Joseph ends up in Egypt, right? And there's the whole story with Joseph in Egypt. He tells Pharaoh what his dream means. This gives him favor in the sight of the Pharaoh. But it isn't just the favor he gets in the sight of the Pharaoh, right? After he's been in prison and all this stuff, falsely accused, right? Jews being falsely accused of something, well, that's not just happening now, is it? It's happening back then. And so Joseph is in prison, right? But then, right, he rightly interprets this dream of Pharaoh, but the dream says, you're going to have a huge famine, buddy. But first, you're going to have, was it 7 years of each one? Something like that. Yeah, something like that. So 7 years of bountiful harvest, and then 7 years of famine. And the famine's going to be so bad, it's basically going to fill the world. But it was very terrible famine. And so why do you think this is happening, right? Why do you think this is so important? Well, because God made a promise to Israel and to Israel's father and to his father's father, Abraham, which was, I will make of you a great nation, right? I'll give you this land and make you a great nation. So this is a promise by God. Do not doubt God on his promises, okay? Because even if you don't fulfill your end of the bargain, he doesn't renege on his agreements. So he is keeping a promise to Abraham, who was Abram, a pagan, who became Abraham to follow the one and only God. And so he has to fulfill this agreement to Abraham, who's already gone. He's already passed away. But his promise wasn't just to him, right? It was to his descendants, and that he would have so many descendants, and that from these descendants would come a great king, right? Gee, I wonder who that is. But from his descendants would come a great king who would heal the world. So this is a pretty big promise, right? This is like a little bit bigger than the lottery. Because this isn't just about you, right? This is about all your descendants and family. And the fate of the earth. This is a pretty big deal, right? This is like superhero film level blue light coming into the heavens. The whole earth could be destroyed. No, Abraham comes, God works together with Abraham and to save the planet, right? So this is superhero level stakes here.
Yeah.
And God has this deal with Abraham. It passes down to Isaac and Jacob, who becomes Israel. And Joseph comes from Israel, comes from Jacob. And so Joseph is in Egypt, and now he gets placed in charge of the effort to save Egypt and the surrounding countries from this terrible famine. And how he does it is God gives him the plan in his dream. You're going to get 7 of these and 7 of those. Well, you've got to, this bounty is for a reason, right? The bounty isn't just there. There's a reason that God tells them about the bounty, because the bounty is going to give them enough food to survive the 7 years coming. But they have to be diligent to store this food. They're not going to use it and waste it, right? They're going to store it. So what kind of crazy person doesn't, back in the day, right, doesn't just consume what they're being given? People didn't always do that. People didn't always store stuff in barns back then. They would have great big feasts, right? And so this was kind of an unprecedented change in many ways. I'm not saying they didn't do it, but it was in preparation for a prophesied famine. So this is a pretty severe famine, enough to where you've got to save a lot of this food. And so Joseph takes over the operation in Egypt to store all this food over those 7 years. And he does, and guess who the famine affects? His parents' family back in Canaan land, or where Israel is supposed to be. And because Israel is still kind of like just a goat herder, like he's still just kind of like a cattle farmer, goat herder dude, lives out in the savannah, you know. And by the way, those kinds of people were hated by the Egyptians. The Egyptians did not like those people. They mocked them and made fun of them and were racist against them. So the Egyptians were racist against the Israelites, not because they were Israelites. Israelites were just brand new, right? They were just a family, a large family, but they were against goat herders and these kinds of people that lived out in the pasture. They thought they were stinky and gross.
Yeah.
So, and backwards. So what happens? Well, Joseph is in charge, right? And so even though the Egyptians don't like these goat herders, because Joseph's in charge, he's able to secure his family's survival, right? So his family gets to survive in Egypt during this terrible famine, right? And bigotry is overcome, and they're allowed to live in Egypt unhampered, unhindered by Egyptian hatred.
Yeah.
And so much so where years later, the future Pharaoh that never knew Joseph's secret powers, right, his superhero powers, didn't know Joseph, didn't care about Joseph or his history with the previous Pharaoh, and feared and hated the Jews that lived there eventually, because they didn't have the same compassion for the Jews that lived there. And so they started persecuting the Jews that lived in Egypt. This is years later. But they had lived in Egypt for a while, and they set up a home there. And I don't remember how long it was later, but because there's a time frame there. But basically, the Egyptians are living in Egypt all this time. This Pharaoh that comes, I think it's like 2 pharaohs later, doesn't like the Jews who have grown in population and strength in their nation, and they want to eliminate them and get rid of them. So they overwork them, right, so that they cannot gain power in the country. And so they're basically treated like indentured not even indentured, but basically chattel slavery. They're treated terribly. So, and then there's a man named Moses who, do you remember the story, honey, of how the children were mistreated? The Jewish children were mistreated in Egypt. And this is how they found Moses.
I think the story is not really one of my favorite stories, but I think it's the story was that the Pharaoh at the time thought that the Jews were becoming too numerous.
Yep.
And asked the Jewish midwives to, make it so that many of the babies didn't survive, and then, but the midwives didn't. They didn't do that. They didn't.
They didn't all do it.
But so then.
So many of them escaped, right?
Many escaped, but then many lived.
Right. They didn't they're babies. They're totally helpless, innocent people. Yeah. And so these midwives would find ways of saving these children, and Moses was a result of this. His midwife sent him down a river in a little basket.
His mom did.
Yeah, his mom.
Yeah, and then she had her daughter, her older daughter, make sure he was okay, kind of follow the basket along the river. Should I keep going?
Go ahead.
Oh, it's a cool story. Okay, so there's a baby in a basket floating down the river, and who happens to be bathing in the river, but the Egyptian daughter of the Pharaoh, and she's just bathing there, and she finds this cute little baby in a basket, and she's like, "This must be one of the Hebrew babies. I'm going to adopt it as my own and raise it." And Moses' older sister Miriam, who is, watching this unfold, she runs back and tells her mom. And the Egyptian princess finds this, the Egyptian princess is like, "I have this baby, and this baby needs to nurse. Like, this baby needs milk. So
send the nursemaid."
The Hebrew mothers.
Yep.
And God is just so good.
Yeah.
Moses' mom is the one they bring in. So Moses' mom actually gets to nurse her own baby and connect with him and love him and not actually lose him. And then Moses is brought up in the palace. So he becomes, schooled and trained in everything that the Egyptians knew.
Yep.
And that's, it's just that part of the story is really cool. So anyway.
It's like God set up his man in Egypt to know everything of how to work with the Egyptians and how to understand their ways and how to speak to them and mediate, right, between his people. He's a perfect mediator.
Yeah.
Because he's both people. He's both Egyptian and Jewish. And so he can mediate between these people. I mean, who could have set this up?
It's perfect.
Who knows? So yes. So this man Moses, he survives, right? And he's got his other name, Egyptian name, as well. But when he becomes a young man, becoming of age and trying to find his way, he tries to defend one of his own people, a Jewish person, and ends up killing an Egyptian. But the Jewish guy didn't appreciate this, and they're like, what are you going to, we don't trust you. And so he's exiled. He basically leaves Egypt to live out in the desert of Midian, I think. I think it's called Midian. Oh, yeah. And he lives out in the desert for, I think, 40 years. And
long time.
Yeah. And basically just is surviving. Like he's just kind of living on borrowed time and just keeping from being imprisoned basically for what he did and suffering for what he did, which is to try to defend his own people. That's all he's trying to do. and trying to keep this person from being harmed, I think. And so here he is in the desert, and it's like he's got nothing, right? But guess what? God does want him around. Not only does God want him around, but he had this plan the entire time. That's why he put him in this position. And this is a really famous, like, intriguing story about the salvation of a whole people, and the repudiation of slavery as a tool of hatred. And so, because this wasn't just slavery for convenience, this was slavery because of hatred. The Egyptians didn't like the Jewish people, and what can you say to that? Like, so the fact that people don't know this story or forget about the story and think that Jewish people or Christians, first of all, that we're bad people because we're racist or that we like slavery, is obnoxiously ridiculous. Like, so sure, there are ignorant people who call themselves Christians, but that doesn't mean that the tenets of Christianity and our founding documents, the Bible, is not clearly against this kind of abuse of people and hatred of people and bigotry towards people. It's clearly these messages are right there, right? So, Media Moses, let me just get to it, because I've been beating around the bush here. Media Moses is about an exodus out of Hollywood, right? So Americans need to take an exodus out of Hollywood, because Hollywood owns our media, lock, stock, and barrel. And when I'm talking about Hollywood, I don't mean the little tiny town inside of L.A. County. I'm talking about the industry, right? The film industry, the film and television, and I mean all the other things that they influence, the commercial world. I mean, goodness gracious, they are basically the worldwide culture at this point, the homogenized worldwide culture. And so we export culture around the world in America. That's our greatest export. So, it's what we do, essentially. It's what we became in the West, is a huge media force where we would influence the world with our culture. And it's a very lucrative business, frankly. If you know what you're doing, you can have a vast impact. And we're not talking about just making money on films or TV. We're talking about influencing the culture. And so how people think, right? This is what culture does. It affects how you think about stuff. So Americans need to take an exodus from Hollywood, because Hollywood is mistreating Americans. It's just as simple as that. So people have tried reforming Hollywood. They've tried doing a lot of things, but what they're not doing is having enough belief in themselves to make their own thing. And that's a shame to me, because given the technology and given the cultural differences between the typical American and Hollywood, right, we could do what Hollywood does at like a tenth of the price that they spend. We could do exactly what they do, and better, because we have a connection with the culture that exists. Most Americans are more conservative than Hollywood. So why don't we just make our own culture? I mean, through media, right? The culture is the culture, but the media influences the culture. So anyway, that's my basic introduction to what Media Moses is.
Yeah.
Now we have to talk about how we got here, because it's kind of a story. And last week we talked about a little bit of my film adventures. So that goes into this a little bit. But so I'll go into that. I was brought up a Christian, but also my brother before me was an artist, and so I was like, oh, I can't be as good as art as he is, but it's just for fun. Like, I'll just make art for fun, and I always excelled at that in school anyway. So it's always nice when you can excel at something. Even though I wasn't really trying, it wasn't like something I was striving for, right? In fact, my father told me, you really shouldn't put your eggs in that basket, frankly. I think he didn't understand basically how artists make money. And so he's not wrong, though, that it is hard to make money as an artist quite often. But that was what I was mostly given any favor for doing growing up. Like, I wasn't good at most of these other subjects. But there's this story about how, one of the things I didn't like about being an artist was that I started hearing this idea that artists had to be their own marketing operation. And I really did not like this idea, because what I had learned growing up, of the little art history that I did have, was that artists had benefactors. And that's basically how the arts as an industry started during like the Renaissance, right? Is that artists would have benefactors. Those benefactors would basically provide the basics that the artists need to start making art. And then the benefactor gets first dibs on the artist's work, and often they even just own what the artist does. And what they're doing is giving the artist room and board and supplies, and then they just get the art. And so it's kind of like they're just paying for room and board. That's not as good of a situation, right, for the artist. But it wasn't unheard of. But the idea was that this benefactor saw the value of this artist. And so they provided for the needs of this artist. And the artist didn't have to worry about any of their needs.
Yeah.
And so they could just focus on their art. And this helped art to thrive in many ways, because artists are often really good at art and really bad at everything else. Like, we're bad at like taking care of our finances. We're bad at like all this other stuff. And sometimes we're not even very social. Sometimes we're just kind of like old codgers who don't want to talk to anybody. And so the great thing about it is that this is a win-win for us, right? And we're not getting much money anyway, so we'd rather just have our needs met and be able to continue making our art. Well, this isn't quite enough for most benefactors, because or for some artists who want to go rogue, right? Because what they can do is they can start having shows and getting money that way. So if they like, for example, an artist could work with the benefactor to get what they need to make a bunch of art, and then leave their benefactor and have an art show and get the money from that art show, and then they don't need the benefactor anymore, right? So there has to be kind of a mutually beneficial situation for the artist into the future and the benefactor into the future. And so they tend to work together more fairly, considering the fact that the artist could just leave and the benefactor then might get nothing after that. So, certain contracts get drawn up based on this kind of win-win scenario that they're looking for. So, but again, the same thing applies, which is that the artist needs someone to take care of their needs, and the benefactor is taking a bit of a gamble themselves, because they don't know if this art is actually going to be worth that much. what they end up doing, and this is a really important thing here because we're talking about marketing essentially. What the benefactor ends up doing is telling the artist, I will make you a show. And I will pay for all the marketing costs. At the time they didn't call it this. I'll make a bunch of buzz for you, you know.
Yeah.
And people will all come to the show, and then, you know, they could make a deal like, we'll split the proceeds 50-50 or something. You know what I mean? It's a show, right? And so the benefactor kind of draws up this plan to provide the funds for the marketing. The artist provides themselves and their work. So they both are providing something, and then they both come out 50-50. And this starts to look like a performance from like a musician. And musicians would also do this, where they would have a marketing guy or a benefactor or some kind of business savvy person come in and say, I see your value, buddy. I think you're going to have a great show. I'll set up the business side of it. You set up the art side of it. We'll do this 50-50, and we both come out of it well, and we don't have to do anything together again, after that, if you don't want to. But if we do well, right, maybe we'll make this a deal and we can keep doing this. So this is a very advantageous kind of deal for artists because they don't want to have to worry about this stuff. And it's very advantageous for business guys because all they have to do is focus on the business. They don't have to focus on any of the other stuff. And they're just setting up an event. And then they make buku bucks from this single event that the artist spent months preparing for, right? So it works very well for both people. And so here we are now, and people are like, you got to do your own marketing now as an artist. And I'm like, what? When did this whole idea start that artists had to also become business savvy people and they can't work with anybody else? No other business person will see their value and see their potential and invest in them, right? So why is this happening? And here's why. Okay, so many of the arts was taken over by Hollywood. Every kind of art taken over by Hollywood. The visual arts, fine artists, the music industry, so many of these other people. And they start owning the business, lock, stock, and barrel. Everything, beginning to end, cradle to grave, everything. And so, how did they do this? Well, they are a marketing force. So why are they asking artists to do this? Well, because the most risky part of marketing is the first part of marketing. That's the most risky part. And so Hollywood's got billions and billions of dollars. Why are they so scared of risk? Why are they going to lose a few million? Why do they, the business in Hollywood is about, it's very in demand. There's tons of new people always showing their face, being like, I'm so cool, right? They want to be in Hollywood. They like to rub elbows. Well, guess what? You're going to have to take the risk because you want to. You want to be out there trying to get famous, etc. And Hollywood is not going to give you a dime, right? You have to really do something amazing and risk hundreds of thousands of dollars, possibly. And then, you know what? Maybe if they like you, they'll throw you a bone and save you. And then, guess what? They own all your stuff. So you don't get anything. What you do get is the hopes that you'll become famous. And then with that fame, you can make your own money later. But the truth is, a lot of music artists are like this too. They don't even own their masters. They don't own their, you know what their masters are? It's basically the best copy of their files, of their music, their own music. They don't even own their own music.
Yeah.
Right? So the companies own their music, and is it that really that expensive to have masters? Not really. It's not really that expensive to make masters. 10, 20,000, something like that. And how expensive do you think films are? So much more than the masters from a musician. So how much do you think these filmmakers are owned lock, stock, and barrel by Hollywood? Ton of them. They don't own their own films. No. So what they're hoping for is, throw me a bone, Hollywood, make me famous, and then I can make a film somewhere else if I'm lucky and I don't need you. Guess what? You do need them anyway. You know why? Because they own all the distribution. And if you really want good money, what do you have to do? You can't use your own marketing. You got to use their marketing. So because their marketing is like 100 times better than yours, I assure you. So this is not very attractive to me, right? This ends up being very unattractive to me as an artist looking down the barrel of Hollywood going, I don't even know if I can work with these people, and they want to take all my stuff. So, why would I do this to myself? So, yes, technology changes a lot, but it doesn't change everything. They still own all the avenues of distribution, and they have all the best methods of marketing that are not as risky, not nearly as risky as if you market something yourself. So this is not looking very attractive, I just got to say. So that was a lot of my experience. I got a lot of that experience trying to become a producer in Hollywood, which I talked about in my last episode, and you can listen to that. But that, I would go to AFM and learn from AFM and meet people in Hollywood, etc. And, mostly it's all local stuff, though. I live in Florida, so it's a lot of local stuff. And go up to Georgia, right? I ended up going to Georgia and starting a film networking group, borrowed from the Atlanta group called Film Bar Mondays. It's basically like a mixer where we talk film and hang out. And a mixer basically comes from the film festival circuit. So that's kind of how you rub elbows with people in the indie world if you're not in Hollywood, where you get lunches and you get parties, right? You get a mixer. But where I live, we don't do this stuff. That's why I brought it here. We don't do this stuff much. And so people don't actually get to be social, which is a real shame. And so they're not learning, because, when I went to Hollywood, it's all about being social. So back where I live, nobody does that. And I'm thinking, I'm not even practicing pitching. I don't even get to practice pitching with anybody. I don't get, because if you want to get good at pitching, you got to practice pitching, across somebody else. So you need like a producer or some friend or something. It's best to do it, though, in front of strangers. That's the truth. If you can't do that, how are you going to do that to like a distributor in LA? Or like some producer or somebody? Like, good luck, So you got to get some experience doing this kind of thing. Well, I found this group, Film Bar Mondays, Atlanta, because Atlanta has a very large film industry now after Runaway Production occurred. And Georgia has taken incentives to the nth degree. They got some of the best incentives in the world. They attract a lot of film business in Georgia. Let's just say that. So people down here in Florida, if we want to get a film made, half the time we got to go to Georgia to get actors or crew, right? Because that's what they got now. They got all of our satellite business that goes up there. So, because we don't have incentives here. So I took Film Bar Mondays down here, learned a lot about community from this, by the way. and you know, I get to learn how to produce. You know, I learned a little bit about festivals. You know, a little bit about basically like the indie filmmaker hype machine. What is that? You know, you gotta go on social media and hype your own stuff. It's very disingenuous. It's very commercial. Like it's in many ways it's just it's like you're your own little salesman everywhere you go. You're not about anything except yourself and your films, and that's what you have to be spending all your time doing. So this is just not, you know, it's not authentic. It's not real. You know, I don't like doing it. Um, so I started studying marketing, but I didn't think of it as marketing. I thought of it more as like, well, how do I get my stuff out there, right? How do I, you know, like me and you, Rebecca, we oh, you can't hear. Oh, there you are. Are you there?
I'm here.
I know I'm doing a lot of talking, so if you,
No, it's all good. I'm
you know,
listening.
but remember when we put out Death Do Us Part,
Yeah.
and we made those little, what did I call them? They were like picture stories or something. I don't remember.
Oh, yeah.
But basically the idea was, and this is when social media was like pretty new. So we were kind of being creative a little bit. But
Yeah, it was sort of like a meme, I think, but
yes,
yeah.
it was basically like a meme. We were making like mini posters that had like a thematic idea to them, and we would put like meme-ish kind of phrases on the picture.
Yeah.
I would get screen grabs, right, or stills from the footage, and then I would just change them in Photoshop or whatever, or you would change them in Photoshop, and then we would put meme-ish kind of like phrases on top of it, and it would be like a little ad for the film.
Yeah.
I thought it was really, really fun.
Yeah, it was neat.
You know, it's a neat idea, and now today it's like you'd probably have to make like shorts or reels instead
Yeah.
to really get attention. And of course, we cut a few trailers, stuff like this. You know, stuff that if you're a filmmaker in Hollywood, you don't have to do yourself. In fact, you're not encouraged to do it. They have a company doing it for you, and half the time they ruin your marketing for you, and they mismarket it, and it can be devastating for a film when your film is mismarketed. It's just it's the worst. And there's a lot of cases that I saw of that happening to films. And so I was even thinking like, well, if I did start to make films in Hollywood, I would be like, I'm going to do my own I'm going to do my own trailer. I'm going to do my own little, you know, thing. And, you know, just, and you don't have to pay anybody. Like, I'll do it.
Well, remember, that's kind of, well, sort of what Robert Rodriguez did. He was like, well, I'm just going to edit my own film, and I'm just going to do all of this, and you're welcome. You don't have to pay anybody else. You can just pay me or something to that effect. And I don't know if he did the marketing, but I know he did the editing and a lot of the visual effects for his films.
Yeah, I think a lot of his story inspired like most indie filmmakers at that time. Like for the next 20 years after he wrote that book, what was it? Something without a crew.
Yeah.
Rebel Without a Crew.
Yep.
His ethos inspired thousands and thousands and thousands of indie filmmakers, including us. And now I look back and I go, that was crazy, because he was part of this whole thing of you have to market your own film.
Yeah.
He was part of that whole movement saying that you had to do everything. You had to go on social media and do everything yourself, and kind of like becoming a hype machine for yourself. And the idea was that you would have this exclusive agreement or something with the studio, and you would do all this work for them, basically, and they didn't have to pay anybody else, and that's the way you would make your money back better. So, but, you know, now I look back and I'm like, Like, I believe in that to a degree. You know, it's kind of like when you're shooting a film and you're like, oh, I don't need like necessarily this crew member. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, on a Hollywood set, like, there's all these crew members that are almost like mandated to be there. Like, no, we need a whole department of these people and a whole department of those people. But when you have like an indie film ethos, you kind of cut into that a lot, and you start to go. You have the mini hats wearing idea, you know, where it's like people are going to wear mini hats, and they're not going to take credit for it, and they're not going to be paid more for that. They're just going to do it out of love for the film and for the filmmakers, and that's kind of an indie filmmaking ethos, you know. That's kind of when you can do that, you know that you're a real indie filmmaker. Like, it's respect, you know. And when someone's always like trying to get more money by doing another job, you know that it's kind of like, ugh, like yucky.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to work with that person. Like, they don't believe in what we're doing. They're just trying to, like, they think we're made of money just because we have a producer by our name. Like, they think that means we're made of money. Like, they don't know what they're talking about. Like, we're just riding by the seat of our pants here because we love film. And if they're not going to bring the same thing to the table, then it's kind of like, ugh, it's kind of yucky. Like, I don't want to know that person. And after this film, I'm not going to hire them again. So, you know, so we lived by that kind of ethos, which was very Robert Rodriguez, right? Where we would definitely try to do multiple things on set. And in fact, that's kind of how I saw myself as a filmmaker, which wasn't, you know, it wasn't necessarily like learn it all, but it was kind of like I want to follow the pathway of how the golden age of Hollywood was, where you apprentice and you work your way up the ranks. I kind of believe in that a little bit. And so I wanted to at least do multiple jobs on set before I started directing. And so I did that, except after the first feature film I did, the director was like, "You're a producer, man. Like, you know, this is what you did for me. And so you're going to be credited." And how am I going to say no to that? So, because I actually did do a lot of work, you know, we worked for 6 months without pay on that film. So, I mean, that was, I'll take the credit, you know, basically, you know. So, and plus I got to learn more that way anyway. So, but sometimes you have to go as far as you can. But like after that, even though I was credited as producer, I didn't see myself as like above doing a PA job. And I did PA jobs after that. I did production coordinator jobs. I did an AD job or two, you know, those kinds of things. Because the administrative work, the organizational administrative work is very kind of like, it's in line of being a producer. It's basically like a producer could do this job if you're not doing it. If you're not around, we could do that job. So we could break down the script and we could break down all this stuff. We could even make storyboards if we have to do it. Like, you know, stick figures if we have to, you know, but if nobody else is going to do it, we're going to do it, you know. And so that was kind of like how we grew up. But the truth was, I did not want to do marketing. That was not... I'm the least commercial kind of person you can imagine. And you know this, honey, because I'd worked for the Home Shopping Network, and I didn't like the corporate environment. It really wasn't me. It wasn't very creative, in my view. I mean, you know, looking back, I could have appreciated it more, maybe, but it wasn't like my favorite thing to do. And you know, so you get to see, though, how success happens in Hollywood. And the truth is, it happens through good marketing, and it happens through bad deals with studios in which you come out on the bottom and the studio comes out on top and they own all your stuff. That's kind of how success is made in Hollywood. And so, it's called Tinseltown for a reason. And that means a lot of these films are made through hype and buzz.
Yeah.
And if a film does well, it's like Barbie, for example. Barbie, people talk about, oh, the film did good because of, the bold production design, or Greta Gerwig, the director, or Margot Robbie, like how perfect she was as Barbie. Guys, it was marketed unbelievably. That film was probably one of the most marketed films in history. They spent more money on marketing than the actual film. More on marketing. We're talking millions and millions, like hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing. I mean, that's why it was successful. Not one single doubt in my mind that that's what made that film successful. It was the perfect marketing film. It was all about simple visuals that everybody already understands, built-in audience.
Yeah.
So they just keep pressing on that button, and you get a treat. You just press on the button, get a treat. Press on the button, get a treat. Like you're a rat in a cage. That's what marketing is for. So immediate gratification. And, but let me tell you, after things changed a lot in 2020, and my film networking group was not working out. Gee, I wonder why. We only meet in person, right? And there's a certain virus going around. And people didn't want to come around and do networking anymore. And filmmaking is a very left-wing leaning industry. So guess what? I didn't want to make our film networking group political, not one iota. But guess what? It became political. Nobody showed up for months and months and months. The group just is destroyed, right? I'm not saying it is destroyed. I mean, it still exists, but we have to bring it back, basically.
Yeah.
But let me tell you, that will change you. And it taught me a lot about what community really is. Community is not anywhere online. It's people you know personally and you're willing to give to them, even though you don't get anything back from them. You're just willing to pay into this, give into this community of people. And because you love film. A film community is about loving film. It's not about politics. It's about loving film. You make real friends and you believe in those friends and you show up for those people. And so that's real community. And, like church, if you go to church, that's supposed to be a community. You're supposed to show up for those people and love those people. And so that's what that's about. We ended up making a podcast. And some of this I talked about last episode, it's true. But I'm trying to get to what Media Moses is, which is a result of all these things, right? So our podcast was called Film Bar Review. We talked up local filmmakers, talked about their war stories, talked about how they made their films. And it was a ton of fun to talk about film so much. But we ended up talking a lot about how to change the industry because we felt that there's not enough. Basically, we felt like people gave up on cinema, where Martin Scorsese talks about cinema and that cinema's dead because of the superhero film, and now also because people don't go to the cinema. And and yes, he does talk about this, but a lot of people don't think about it. It's about streaming. The Hollywood bought into the streaming model, and they've basically decided theaters are out. And so, what does this do to actual cinema, though. This cinematic experience still exists somewhere in the heart of someone. And in the mind of an artist who really believes in the art form, like Scorsese does, and plenty of filmmakers like Christopher Nolan still are like, nope, I'm only going to do cinema, I'm only going to do IMAX, I'm only going to, like, they believe in the platform of cinema and what cinema is trying to accomplish. They spend millions and millions of extra dollars to feed into the art form of cinema just because they love it. And so Hollywood is, it's almost like Hollywood has this self-destructive aspect to it, where it's all about IP to them, it's all about just making a buck, and it's about controlling the culture. It's not about cinema, right? Like, they could take it or leave it, you know. It's about, for them, it's about the technology so that they can have the power and they can have the money. And so that's what we ended up talking about in the podcast. And you can listen to it. It's on Spotify, the Film Bar Review with Jon Croft and Tim Mannix, my bro Tim Mannix.
It turned out really good.
Thank you. Yeah, it did. It was a lot of fun. We committed ourselves to 12 episodes, one a month. We did it for about a year in, I think, 2021. And so, yeah, 2020 hit. Nobody's coming. We ended up doing the podcast 2021. And 2022, we were just like, well, you know, we're going to try some things. Nothing really came of that. And so I'm like, well, what am I going to do if I can't do Film Bar Mondays? I mean, I did try to bring it back, and there was a few people who would come, but this was just not enough to sustain the regular meetings. So, you know, so basically, as a result of our conversations, we started talking about a new film movement. And we had a few names for this movement, but suffice to say, we kind of wanted to draw from our inspiration from the French New Wave and kind of saw a lot of parallels between what's going on in our society now and the French New Wave, because the French New Wave came after World War II. It was kind of a natural result of World War II. There was a lot of cultural changes. There was technological changes. They could shoot a film on a street corner without lights. They could sync sound, and do that a lot cheaper than they could do before then. So they didn't need a whole crew of people to make films. And also, they found that Hollywood was making these big films that just weren't speaking to who they were, and speaking to the challenges and the issues that they felt in Europe. And so, you know, this was also happening in Italy. The same kind of movement was happening there to some degree. Later in Germany, obviously it took some time for them to rebuild. But this had an impact on me because I felt that the aesthetic was clean and pure. The stories were intimate and real. And the equipment was sparse without crew. You know, so it's there's a lot of reasons why this could work very well for the kind of film we need today, which is more intimate films about stuff people are dealing with, less kind of Hollywood hype superhero film. It's a very similar moment in time, isn't it? Hollywood's making these big glossy pictures that don't speak to people, right? Just like they're doing now. And they want something to help them deal with the traumas they've been through in World War II. So the traumas we've been through in 2020, Like, there's stuff we want to unpack and deal with. And how are you going to do that when Hollywood just doesn't care to talk about these issues? So you have to do your own thing, right? So I called this movement con wave, which is conservative wave, but it doesn't, I mean, it doesn't, maybe that's not the best name. I don't know. Maybe it's not about conservatism, but like it's got to be something different. It's got to be a new, wave of indie filmmakers that believe in this new aesthetic. And the aesthetic to me was basically very similar to the French New Wave, where I think it should be black and white, because then you don't have as many challenges shooting on a street. You don't have to, mess with stuff too much to get the right color schema in your film. You just shoot black and white. And so you can shoot anywhere, you can shoot unplanned. And it's more about, it's like a grayscale thing you're dealing with. It ends up being high contrast or low contrast. And that's almost some of the only stuff you have to think about. Obviously, you have to think about light. Is this enough light? Digital cameras are pretty good in low light. Another great thing they didn't have back then is we have LED lights now. LED lights cut down on your power demands on a set enormously. You can have a few lights that are mobile lights. You can stick on a, you don't even have to put them on a tripod or on a C-stand or whatever. You can attach them to a wall or something. So like, this is stuff you can do. Like, back then, I mean, film noir, if you don't know much about stuff like film noir often they had like one or two strong light sources, and they would sculpt a whole scene with just a few lights, and that's where it got the film noir feel, is just the efficiency that they had to deal with. So these happened through artistic limitation and budget limitations. So, there's no reason we can't do this today. In fact, we have every ability to do this today. It's just the will. Do we really have the will to make a new film movement? So these were discussions that me and Tim had, and I was kind of excited about it.
Yeah.
We tried to work on a few pictures after that. One of them was called Iggy and Alma. I just kept having things that kept happening, so that we couldn't accomplish it. And a lot of stuff would get in the way. But all along this time, it kept also being about the marketing. Like, how are we going to, at least for me it was, not necessarily for Tim. Tim is not on the same page with me about the marketing. And I think for him, he just wants to focus on the filmmaking aspect. And in my view, since, because of my history, I couldn't put down this idea that I had to be part of the marketing eventually, even though I couldn't stand it. And to this day, I kind of still loathe it. I'm like, do I have to be doing marketing? I wish, in my heart of hearts, I wish I could just leave it to somebody else, but stuff happened during this period in which I started actually appreciating marketing. I started actually doing research on it. I did research on the superhero film, how people in our society continue to say that superhero films are dangerous and bad for Hollywood, and yet, if they're well marketed, the blockbuster superhero film is the most profitable film like that exists. Hollywood was making tons of money, while at the same time people were putting out articles saying that Hollywood was losing money and they were acting very dangerously. And the reason is very simple, because Hollywood had dual interests, and those interests were to make money, but also to go to streaming at the same time. So they didn't want to put out the narrative that making money in theatrical was viable. They didn't want to put out that narrative. They wanted to put out the narrative like, oh, we're doing well, the superhero genre is great, but now we're going to switch over here to streaming. And why is that? It's cradle to grave ownership. That's why. They own everything. They don't have to give any money to a theater. They just own everything, and then you have to subscribe. And like Netflix, they can potentially make tons of money that way. And it's far less risky. So that's what they're aiming for. Guess what's happened with streaming? Well, what's happened is every streaming platform except Netflix has lost millions and millions of dollars. So why do they keep talking about how great streaming is? Right? So this is a problem in Hollywood. It's like there's no one at the steering wheel. They just keep making these blunders, and they keep making these false narratives that theatrical is dead and it's no longer a viable solution, when companies like Angel Studios have pressed in to theatrical and started making a lot of money to draw the ire and jealousy of Hollywood and make them put out, articles in hatred of Angel Studios. So, it's kind of weird and contradictory for them to put out these multiple narratives. But this is just how crazy Hollywood is. So they have this long-term goal. They're not going to tell you. And they're going to put out all these articles saying things to get them to that goal. But you're going to read the articles and go why do they keep pushing on this narrative? And they'll give you a lot of reasons why theatrical is dead and all these things. But if you really look at the numbers, it doesn't really make a ton of sense. I know that's not extremely interesting to most people, but I've studied all this stuff. You can find a lot of it online. Just what I said about streaming, you can find that anywhere right now. They're starting to admit it now. But we knew this years ago, that streaming was not doing well. They just kept believing it and kept pumping up the hype machine. So Disney Plus, who knows if they're going to make any money? They could lose it all. So not a great model. I don't personally believe in the streaming model or even the subscription model, even though Media Moses is a subscription newsletter, newspaper, news site, and because that's what we have to do right now. But what we're hoping to do is different in the future. And it's not like subscriptions don't work. Subscriptions can be really great. But anyway, my point is that theatrical is still a viable business platform for filmmakers. And Hollywood is just really great at gatekeeping and trying to control their product. But I believe that indie filmmakers can do forewalling and can get an indie film movement off the ground if they really try, especially because Hollywood is leaving counter space for someone else to take when they don't do well in theatrical. So a lot of the Hollywood product is not doing well in theatrical. And if the theaters get better product that will make more money, which, as I mentioned with Angel Studios is getting more theatrical shelf space, basically, where Hollywood is losing it. So it proves that this is possible, right? It proves that the theatrical model is still very alive and has great potential if you just make good stories and you make films that are relevant to people where they're at. So, you know, I just learned a great deal about community, about the value of marketing. You know, that basically marketing is like a film, it's like an art form.
Yeah.
And, you know, you do have to do a little research, but like I was doing research as an artist anyway, and looking at, you know, like when I was learning to be a producer, I had to learn what's going on in the market and what's selling and what's not selling is good. And, you know, you do genre studies, you study each genre,
Yeah.
and, you know, you study producers, fellow producers and directors and actors. And I was even studying cinematographers here and there. Like, you just kind of like have to do this kind of work as a producer. And so I was getting to know the trades, you know, which is the Hollywood Reporter, Variety, and Deadline. And so you just have to know these publications when you're a producer. And as a Christian conservative, I am shocked and perplexed that it seems like nobody in the faith-based film industry, nobody in the conservative film industry, which barely exists, understands that marketing is how you make a film movement. If you're going to make any kind of money, first of all, you need to do marketing. If you're going to make a film movement, even more so. So, you know, the fact that we're not doing this is kind of, it's crazy. Like, films generally don't make money. Generally. So, you know, if you want to make any kind of cultural movement, you got to have marketing. And because it's not going to be sustainable without it. It's true that you might have to pay a little bit of money into it, of course. And I'm not a believer in Hollywood accounting. I think you need to honestly do accounting, and the reason is because it's for the benefit of the whole industry. Hollywood likes to hide their books because then they can fudge some stuff here and there and get more funding next time, or they can pretend like they made more money than they did, right? Just leave off a few numbers, leave off a few zeros here and there. Like, for example, they don't report their marketing budgets, generally. They really don't. So they could spend millions on a film, and then the narrative, it comes out that they made money on a film, and they might not have made 1 red cent on that film because they already spent it on marketing. So they've not made it back. They're not in the black at all. They're in the red. So, like, but they want to establish this narrative that, like, this film is so great. We made so much money in the theaters, right? It's a success, right? Because one success builds more success. So sometimes owning the narrative for them is very important. You know, if they can own the narrative, then, you know, and this is where their friends in the media help, you know, and they can work together with the media to craft a narrative that's in their best interest. So, you know, the idea with marketing is to, you know, help the health of the industry. But the problem is some people will buy out interest, and then you'll have access media who are in the pocket of some producer, and that's just not how things should run. It's not honest. It's not above board. If people knew the true marketing budgets, then you could better judge for good filmmaking in the future. So it benefits the future filmmakers who've looked at the results of your film. They can take a better assay of your, you know, like a better post-mortem of your film, a more accurate one, and then better make films from that in the future. But if we keep hiding what we're doing the way Hollywood does, it kind of, things become inflated and ridiculous, and then people really are going to be losing a lot of money And then they're wondering why. Like, well, they did this other thing over here. Why didn't it work for me? Because they didn't tell you the truth. They actually didn't do so good. But maybe they have money from their other part of their conglomerate to survive, and you don't. So they're fine, but you're not. And that's because they did not give you the full skivvy on the whole situation. But so my belief is that in order to have a healthy industry of any kind, there needs to be transparency with this kind of stuff. And so I just believe in that. But one of the biggest things I learned from this was that, community is about the Phalanx. The Phalanx is a military unit from the Greek Empire, in which you have hoplites all together. They have a shield, they have a sword. And each hoplite uses that shield not for himself, to protect himself and cover his own butt. He uses that shield to cover his friend, his neighbor, and to show love to his neighbor. Right? And that Phalanx, as a result of this philosophy, that Phalanx is like a turtle shell, and it cannot be defeated on the military field, right? The field of battle. But this is how the Greek military grew so quickly and became such a force during Alexander the Great, is because of their military savvy using the Phalanx, which is a form of community, right? So you love your neighbor more than yourself, and you all protect each other, and you become a strong fighting unit. So, that's how they did that. They had other philosophies too in the ancient world, the Greek world. The planting of trees under whose shade we shall never sit. That's what they believed. That was making good culture, good community. And so do we believe that now? Do we believe in giving of ourselves to a larger community? That's a community that it's not going to benefit us. Like, everybody's thinking about themselves. And I feel like there's something been lost in the church as well, where we don't think of giving to our neighbor and loving our neighbor as much. We think a lot of ourselves. How do we look?
Yeah.
So that's just kind of sad that things have become that. But in the process of this whole thing, I've learned also that a lot of my film and story ideas was not about appealing to my audience. It was about appealing to myself. And instead, I had to learn to make something that would appeal to the audience that I really wanted. Right? And instead of just thinking of myself as a selfish artist and what I wanted to make. So that's the kind of stories I'm working on now. And I'm working on Media Moses. Media Moses is a media company. We're going to be doing things kind of like the Daily Wire in some ways. We're not focused so much on influencers the way they are with all of their famous people. What we want more is, well, also one big factor here is we're not into politics on Media Moses. It's not that we don't ever talk about politics, because sometimes you can't or sometimes the story is related somewhat to politics, and often entertainment and politics sadly do mix sometimes. Yeah. But this should not be the case. And I think of it in some ways as a lifestyle magazine on the internet. But what kind of lifestyle, right, are we hoping to have in our communities? And so this, we're hoping the communities around America can change, and that we can have an American revival, and that our communities can be more conservative again. And, we want to promote star making like Hollywood used to have, except our stars kind of love Jesus Christ instead of loving themselves, right? So they're like about good stuff, about good living, humility, loving your neighbor, right? These kinds of values that you just don't see a lot anymore, especially not from Hollywood, who are all about fame and fortune and yourself and your ego, feeding your ego and all of this stuff. So we're not into all that stuff. We're into building communities, and communities that love their neighbor, love their churches, and love their families. That's the kind of stuff we want to build. We also want our stories to emulate that. Let me just finish up here. So I wanted to again talk about what Media Moses is before we close it out. And Media Moses, again, we believe that culture is a dialogue where we all freely talk, freedom of speech. We get to talk about, stuff without fear of reprisal about our opinions and our views. So this is about us talking about culture and our mythologies and our favorite stories and our legends, freely and openly, talking about the values behind them, and having just kind of an open, free discussion about these things. That's how we believe culture is formed. So it's not through propaganda or propagandizing people, or these kind of like pat yourself on the back stories, to make yourself feel good about yourself. No, that's not a human story. Human stories about people who fail, are not perfect. They're like stories about Moses. Like Moses killed a man and was not a great person, frankly, but God called him to do something. And so he had to give of himself humbly and do the thing that was hard for him to do, that he didn't believe he could do, so he could save his people. And so if we want to save our people, we have to do like Moses. We have to humble ourselves and be willing to do the things that we don't think we can do, right? And, this is to replace Hollywood in our case. We have to engage in culture creation, and we have to have a proper view not only of what culture creation is, but we have to have a proper view of what bad culture is, so we can reject it, right? So this was a lot of what the Israelites in the desert learned when they exodused out of Egypt. Exodus, is that a word? I don't know. But when they left Egypt, they're in the desert for 40 years, often grumbling against God, not happy about their situation, because even though they were slaves, they still had it better than in the desert with no food and water. So in some ways you can sympathize with them. But God was putting them in a tough situation for a reason. This was so they could learn to trust in God and learn to put all their faith in him as their God. And who is the God who, yes, saved them. So has saved them numerous times. And so that's what we're working on. We're working on building a new culture, and one that's still founded on Jesus Christ, still founded on Americanism, still founded on good communities that love each other, and not founded on stuff that Hollywood is selling or the propaganda machine is selling us. Like, we're not interested in that. So we have upcoming projects on MediaMoses.com. You can find our work. I have an article on there that you have to be a subscriber to get, but I put out a monthly address every month where we talk about what we're doing outside of the actual site. Media Moses Weekly is the weekly one I put out, only for subscribers. We talk about all the articles and shows of that week. We do kind of a breakdown, a rundown. And then we have the monthly address every month. We talk about everything Media Moses is trying to accomplish. And it's kind of like, almost like a private heads up where I talk to everybody and say what's going on and what we're trying to do. I hope it's going to get even better. It's kind of a blow by blow right now, where I just kind of like talk, like I just give you the skivvy on what's happening, and I say, great to see you, and thank you. And this last time I talked about a little bit about our new film called Thin Days that we're developing now. And I'm still writing the script. And it's going to be black and white, as I mentioned for Conwave, that I believe in that aesthetic. It's going to be very small crew and cast. It's going to be shot locally in Florida. It's about a man whose life has changed after being stranded on a deserted island. So in many ways, this is inspired by the story of Moses, right? They're stranded in the desert, and they're changed by this situation. But it's mostly inspired by Jesus's last temptation, 40 days of temptation, and where he fasts for 40 days. So that's what it's mostly inspired by. But it's a come to Jesus moment for this, for the lead actor, and for his character, and who's a photographer, and he gets stranded on a deserted island. So it's about how he survives. But I just want to thank you all. You can unmute if you want to, honey. I just wanted you to.
I'm back.
So I'm sorry about that.
No, I'm sorry. I don't know what that was.
It just would keep coming in and kind of like, almost like static.
Okay.
I guess maybe you didn't hear it, but I could hear it pretty loudly.
Sorry about that. No, I wonder if it's my fancy chain on my phone.
Oh.
Anyways.
Anyway, where can people find you, honey?
You can find me at When We Love Jesus here on X.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also find me on YouTube at Rebecca Loves Jesus, and on Instagram at Jesus Loves Rebecca.
Oh, yeah. And I'm so sorry that you didn't get to talk more.
That's okay. It's good to talk about Media Moses.
Yes, thank you for that. So, yes, you can find me here on at Jon Croft on X. You can find me at The Media Moses at X. You can find me at MediaMoses.com. And I'm on YouTube at Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft. So, a few different places. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for hearing us. We're going to be putting this up on YouTube soon. So thank you so much. Stand up for the culture, and Jesus loves you.